Well, good morning all. Nigel Hendersons is my name, and as Nikki said in her introduction, I'm probably in the SME Alliance group, the member who's been longest fighting our case against RBS. The right bunch of shysters is what I call them, but there we are. The headline for this session is Fraud in and by the Banks, the Ugly Truth. Well, I'm not going to make any apologies for making this a very personal account. 50 years ago, I just left school, age 17, and I hadn't a clue what I was going to do. Not one interest in pursuing any career at that time. Quite considerably different from 2 years previously, when, for as long as I can remember up to that point, my ambition was to become a pilot in the Royal Air Force, and all my endeavours, my choice of subjects at school was all geared towards becoming a member of the Royal Air Force. But unfortunately fate intervened, and in the final year of my 4th year at school, a few weeks before the end of term, the whole year were called into the medical office, where we were all subjected to a colour blindness test. And I vividly remember when it came to my turn, I could hear my fellow classmates outside saying, "Oh, that Henderson is not only colour blind, he must be blind too, because it took so long to get through the colour blindness test." And of course, at the end of the test, we were handed a sheet and career prospects for those who might be affected by colour blindness, and right at the top, RAF pilot. So my interest in pursuing any academic career thereafter for my ambition ceased, and I drifted through 2 final years at school. In fact, I got 2 hires, was probably more chance than any endeavour on my part, and a further 2 years before eventually my parents more or less forced me to join our family business and taking me off the streets. And I had no interest in sitting behind a desk for the rest of my life, but after a short time I did sort of take to the career in commerce. Profit and loss accounts, balance sheets, and more particularly the making of profits is what appealed to me, and I turned my attentions to trying to forge a career in commerce. Unfortunately, it didn't last with the family business, and by 1973 my wife and I, married with a young family, decided to set up our own business, first of all in property. Aberdeen at that time, in the northeast of Scotland, was the start of the oil industry, and property prices were almost doubling annually, and we saw the prospect of being able to trade in property, which was what we did, and that provided the seed capital for our future business interests, which were in obviously property, hotels, and a car rental business. By the middle of the 1980s, we had sold our car rental business to Avis Rent-A-Car, and we had sold one of our hotels, the small hotel that we had in Aberdeen, when a prospect 30 miles south came up, much bigger hotel, and we sold up our house and everything else, moved family lock, stock and barrel to buy this hotel in Montrose. Up until that time, our banking requirements had always been borrowing. We were initially, it was in the thousands. As we expanded, it came into tens of thousands of pounds of borrowing, and by the time in the mid-1980s when we bought the Park Hotel at Montrose, it was the hundreds of thousands of pounds. We never had any problem in securing funding from our bankers. They seemed to like what we were about, they seemed to believe in us, and we got the funding that we required. We worked very hard to establish our business at Montrose, so much so that we decided by 1997, as I said earlier, we looked to add a second hotel to our portfolio. And it was by pure chance that we were also introduced to the Royal Bank of Scotland at that time. They were looking to expand their business, as most banks were, and they offered us the facilities to move from the bank that we had enjoyed a long-standing relationship and they gave us the funding for the new hotel, which was 100% funding on the strength of the collateral that we had in the Park Hotel and the hotel we were buying in Portree in the island of Skye. At that time, our joint asset was total value was about £2 million. Less than a year later, we received an unsolicited offer for the Park Hotel, and it was just £200,000 short of the total amount of our combined hotels. And all our professional advisors at that time said, look, this is a hallelujah offer. At the age we were at, which was 50 years old, we could benefit from tax breaks, and meant that we had no capital gains tax to pay whatsoever on the uplift in value. And we decided, well, we were crazy not to follow the advice given to us by our financial and professional advisors. And we went to the Royal Bank of Scotland, told them what was happening when the cash was placed in deposit with the bank on the sale. We said, right, we have a loan of 760,000 at that time. There's the cash. There's more cash in deposit than we have borrowed. We want to repay the loans. And in effect, they said no. And it comes to the point that Nicky was making earlier, which Steve has highlighted to me, and this again is many years later only discovered what the banks were about: hypothecation and rehypothecation. If Steve wants to expand on the issue from a technical perspective later, I'm sure will be happy to do so, but my understanding is that basically when we applied for the loans, what the bank did was that they granted us the loans for our business, and we obviously offered security over the business assets. But in addition, they would be looking at the overall risk profile of the customer, private as well as personal. And I believe that they looked at our overall personal position as well as our business position and secured all our assets, our personal ones, unknown to us, for the benefit of the bank. So that when, within a year, we were in a position to exit the bank if we wished, they wouldn't let us out of their clutches. Am I right in that general assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I won't kind of go on, but if anybody's been involved in interest rate swaps, they rely on something called the Master Agreement, International Swaps and Derivatives Association. And what it is, it's what international traders use to deal with each other on protecting or guarding against future interest rates. It's effectively an investment bet. But what they do is when assets are put up as collateral for these deals, Nigel didn't realise he was getting into this type of deal, when in fact there's no real documentation around it to say that he was. The bank then, on their balance sheet, can use the assets in the background to raise money. So when Nigel went to the bank and said, I want to pay the debt off, the first thing they said to him, you can't, there's a £250,000 penalty, which he knew nothing about. And ultimately the bank in the background, this is what's happened during the financial crisis, it's all derivative based, and effectively the bank will just utilise and reuse clients' assets on their balance sheet to create more funds. So like in Nigel's position, with the benefit of hindsight, he'd have been better off paying $250,000 and getting out. But of course at the time, he wouldn't have a clue what was going on. You know, and this stuff is only really just starting to come out now.
So there we were, seriously disabused of a lifetime or the prospects of a future life with no borrowing, a house free of mortgage, potentially with more cash, as I say, in the bank, which we could have repaid our business borrowings, and we were euphoric. I can't say anything other than that, having worked all our lives for nearly 30 years and built up the business to that stage. And unfortunately, within the space of less than a year, we were transferred into what was then the Specialised Lending Services Division of the Royal Bank of Scotland. It's now Global Restructuring Group, or Grim Reaper Group as some people refer to it as. And immediately they threatened us with bankruptcy. Now, less than a year later, to be threatened with that, how can anybody cope with that? I mean, that's one of the points I would like to ask you. Just let me ask, if anybody here, apart from those my fellow members who have suffered, who among you have been targeted by bank managers determined to drive your business to financial ruin? Who among you have experienced endless meetings with the professional advisors assuring you that what you dread will not happen, and they assure you that your business is viable and has the asset base more than capable of repaying the bank? Who among you have experienced that same bank continually promising you and your advisors that the bank does not want to destroy you financially and is willing to consider all proposals? Who among you have had arrogant bankers demand, as a condition of continuing support, proposals from your advisors, and when these proposals, formulated with the greatest of care by accountants and lawyers, which clearly take hours in preparation and many hours of your own time away from your normal business duties, these carefully prepared proposals, all of which demonstrate the viability for the future, are contemptuously dismissed by those same bankers who were offering you a lifeline. In my book, those bankers are morally repugnant in refusing every overture to take a conciliatory approach and deal honestly and ethically with the situation and give the business a chance for survival and continuity. Who among you have experienced sleepless nights, tossing and turning, trying to come up with a solution to avert what you know just deep down to be your life's work about to be taken away from you? Who among you have woken up That's okay.
You should be used to it.
You think after all this time you get used to it. I'm sorry it doesn't get any easier. You spend the night tossing and turning, thinking of everything to try and avert what you just know deep down is your life's work about to be taken away from you. You plead with the bank, you do whatever you can, and you know it is all going to fall on deaf ears. Who among you have endured the realization that you are going to be evicted from your house and your home, the business you've spent a lifetime building, with the intention of passing it on to your family, is going to be taken away from you? Well, I can tell you, it's that anguish, the desolation, despair, and utter helplessness that you feel knowing you're headed for financial oblivion, for destitution, or impecunity for the rest of your life, just because a bank has decided on a vindictive campaign just to satisfy their own criminal agenda to drive you into financial oblivion. What makes it all the more cruel is the fact that none of what's befallen you has been of your own making. You've got that gut-wrenching heartache that comes with the announcement from the court that you're going to be made bankrupt at the petition of an unscrupulous bank, and all this happens within 4 years of becoming a customer of that bank. As I said, at the time of the bankruptcy, we had hundreds of thousands of pounds in deposit with the bank, and they refused every overture that we made to repay it. They seized our house, they seized our business. The business was worth at least £800,000. After the bank seized it, they sold it for £157,000, just to make sure that we were wiped out. That is the reality for thousands of victims like us. As Nicky said, many people have suffered. We, unfortunately, are still here, but it hasn't been without personal suffering. At the time, or just before the eventual bankruptcy was confirmed, the bank were aware through our solicitor that my wife was seriously ill in the hospital, and in fact I was told to prepare for the worst. The bank hovered like vultures round, well, not physically around our hospital bed, but they were determined to serve bankruptcy proceedings on us, and they were hovering around the hospital until the minute she was discharged, and within a day or two she was served with the bankruptcy papers, as was I. How callous is that from a supposedly ethical bank? I'm going to quote two well-known quotations which are quite germane to our position. One is from Friedrich Nietzsche: "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." Well, since 2002, despite my little thing over the last few minutes, I've devoted all my efforts in getting recompense from RBS for the devastation that this bank has caused us. And I will continue to assist any other victim who I come across to get any or give the benefit of any lessons that I have learned. Through SME Alliance, we have now met up with quite a significant number of other banking victims over the last few years, and this has provided even more impetus for me to bring change to this discredited banking system. The second quote is from Edmund Burke: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Well, I can assure you all there are certainly a lot of very good men who are dedicated to bringing the banks to account for the criminality that they have been engaged in on an industrial scale. Through my membership of the SME Alliance, I've met many experienced professional experts in various disciplines. Steve is one here today, who, with their intimate knowledge of the workings of the banks and a clear understanding of the criminal conduct, and Andy can speak for that, of which the banks have been engaged in dealing with most of the members of the SME Alliance, they have given generously of their time and expertise in assisting many of the members to pursue cases against the banks. Coming from Scotland, there's a slightly different legal system compared to England. Andy mentioned the Fraud Act in England, Wales. That does not apply in Scotland. The law in Scotland is slightly different, very straightforward. A fraud in Scotland is an offence at common law and is a bringing about of some definite practical result by means of false pretences. But the sting in the tail, it requires to be probed by corroborative evidence. I made a complaint through the Crown Office, which is the prosecuting authority in Scotland, several years ago. They instructed the police to investigate. The police investigated. They believed there was no doubt in our case that a crime of fraud had been committed, but they did say it will have to go to the Crown Office to decide whether or not to bring a prosecution. Well, unfortunately, at that time, corroboration was an issue. They had no other complaints that had been made to the police or had come to the attention of the Crown Office, and in the absence of corroboration they could not proceed. So I set out over the last 18 months to try and identify as many other people in Scotland who have been victims of RBS, and it culminated in a meeting that we all held in November last year, at which 4 others wrote to the police and intimated that they believed they'd been victims of fraud. I myself wrote to the police and gave them the names of the people who would be contacting them, and I copied that letter to the Crown Office. 4 months later, nothing had happened. So I chose to write a letter to the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, which was a very detailed letter explaining the issues where I believe fraud had been committed, and finished by saying that I didn't believe that the investigation by police authorities should be left as I forget the exact terminology I used, but more or less that if they felt like doing it, or they didn't feel like doing it, well, they wouldn't bother. And that letter to the First Minister was passed on to the Crown Office, and eventually, after about 3 months, I did receive some positive response and spoke with the Crown Office just in the early part of the summer, who assured me that they had instructed the police to conduct investigations into the complaints made by 4 people who had complained, and I now know as of very recently that interviews, very lengthy interviews, I know that one person was interviewed for at least 2 5-hour sessions on his case. So things are moving in Scotland. There has also been a change in the prosecuting authority. There's a new Lord Advocate who is the Chief Prosecutor in Scotland, was appointed in June. The previous Lord Advocate, well, I think the chocolate teapot might have been more useful than he was. The new Lord Advocate would appear to have a different approach, and certainly my conversations with the Crown Office tend to suggest that they are taking the complaints very seriously, and that perhaps, if at all possible, they will pursue a criminal complaint, a criminal pursuit against the Royal Bank of Scotland. So that is good news. Speaking personally for our own case, having been fighting so long, we were twice through the civil courts, for which we got legal aid. I don't think it's any secret to say that I believe very strongly that our legal team were nobbled by Royal Bank of Scotland, and from what Andy has been saying, how they change information and present false information to the court, there's certainly clarified in my mind, or confirmed in my mind, that that is what happened. The courts decided that our case had no merit, despite the fact that we had received legal aid, and that the Scottish Legal Aid Board had paid out probably something in the region of £100,000 in fees to cover our complaint civil complaint against the Royal Bank of Scotland. As I said, I know that they were lying in court at one point, despite us having had more money on deposit, despite everything. The bank were still claiming that we were due them £700,000. And just by pure chance, a few months later, I received a copy of some internal documentation which had been written by the bank to say that our accounts were all in credit. So how we were still due £700,000 when they admitted internally they were sitting on credit balances is beyond me. Last year I had the benefit of being invited here and speak, and I just would like to confirm again what I said, that I believe that this bank is utterly devoid of the basic instincts of commercial morality. And I know that speaking with fellow victims of RBS, what has become very clear that there is more lying, corruption, hypocrisy and self-serving concentrated in RBS than anywhere else. And I will finish again as I did last year. To be respected is the best cover in the world for fraud. In fact, fraud could rarely exist without it. That, I believe, is how RBS managed to escape any censure for so long, and it is little wonder that it imploded so spectacularly in 2008. Thank you.